They always say loyalty pays off. I used to believe that. Believed it with the kind of quiet conviction that doesn't need to shout. For 17 years, I showed up early and left late, stayed calm when clients panicked, and found solutions when others gave excuses. I never needed my name on the door or a corner office. I just wanted respect, stability, and to build something that mattered. My name is Carla Jameson. I'm 46, and until a year ago, I was the senior client strategist at Oak Ridge Solutions, a boutique consulting firm tucked into a glass-paneled building just outside Chicago. I started there when I was 29, fresh out of grad school, still wearing my hair in tight buns and my blazers a size too big. I stayed because I loved the work, and I stayed because I believed in the company, believed in him. My boss, Richard West, had interviewed me himself back then. He was sharp, charismatic in a controlled kind of way, said he saw something in me. "You're a builder, Carla," he told me during that first sit-down. "Most people manage, you build." I carried that compliment with me like a medal no one else could see. Over the years, I became the person clients asked for by name. When things went south, an acquisition gone wrong, a sudden market shift, I was the one they trusted. I never took a sick day that wasn't necessary, never missed a deadline. I trained new hires, stayed late for brainstorms, and held my tongue when younger men with half my experience got bumped up the ladder. But I didn't resent it, not then. Because Richard always told me, "Your time's coming. We just have to position it right." And I believed him, year after year. Then, she walked in. Her name was Tessa West. Fresh from Stanford with a brand new MBA and enough designer heels to supply a Nordstrom window display. She was Richard's daughter. I'd heard about her, of course, his brilliant girl, as he called her. And I'll admit it, the first day she arrived, I was ready to welcome her. I even helped set up her office, made her a welcome packet with client portfolios, smiled and offered to catch her up on the firm's biggest accounts. She smiled back, tight, polite. "Thanks, but I think I've got a pretty good grasp. I've been shadowing Dad for a while now." Still, I tried. I showed her how to read between the lines in our client reports, warned her which VPs were sensitive and which CFOs expected weekly check-ins. She nodded through it, barely taking notes, already clicking through Slack as if my words were just background noise. Within 3 months, she had her name attached to 2 major proposals, both of which I wrote. I saw my wording lifted verbatim in the slide decks. No acknowledgement, no thanks. Just her name on the final file and a smile at the presentation table while I sat off to the side. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Richard would never let politics override performance. But something was shifting, and I could feel it. Then came the real punch. It was a Thursday, my yearly review. I had a new navy dress on, the one my daughter said made me look seriously in charge. I walked into Richard's office expecting the promotion he'd been dangling for 2 years. We had discussed it over coffee, over late-night meetings, over conference dinners. "You're next in line for VP of Client Strategy," he'd said more than once. "Just need to get through Q3. Q3 came and went. I sat across from him that morning, hands clasped neatly in my lap, heart steady. He didn't even look up from his desk when he said, "We're going in a different direction with leadership. Tessa will be stepping in as VP." I didn't speak. I couldn't. It felt like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears and flipped the world sideways. "She has the right instincts," he continued. "And frankly, the firm needs fresh energy. You understand?" I opened my mouth, closed it again, swallowed, and I smiled. Not because I meant it, not because I agreed, but because 17 years had taught me that women like me don't get to storm out and slam doors. We get to nod. We get to say, "Of course," and "I understand." We get to cry in the car, not in the boardroom. I walked out of his office with the same straight spine I'd walked in with. But something inside me cracked that day. Not a loud shatter, but the quiet, irreversible kind. Like the first split in a foundation. You can't see it yet, but you know. Everything's about to shift. And I was done waiting for my time to come. I kept showing up. That's the part people don't talk about. After the betrayal. After the humiliation. After your name is pushed aside, like yesterday's agenda item, you still show up. Because what else are you supposed to do? Cry in the break room? Walk out in a blaze of fury that only ends with your resume gathering dust? No. I wore my best blazer, smiled in meetings, took notes in Tessa's briefings like a damn intern. She'd stumble through client calls using buzzwords she didn't fully understand. And I'd quietly follow up with an email to clean up the mess. Not because she deserved it, but because the clients did. Because I did. But it chipped away at me. Bit by bit. Richard stopped dropping by my desk to talk. When I passed him in the hallway, his smile was brittle. Like he was embarrassed for me, but didn't have the decency to say it. I'd become a reminder of loyalty, of what he owed, of everything he had no intention of honoring. The team was quiet around me. I could tell they knew. They didn't know how much I had done behind the scenes, how many accounts I'd rescued, how many crises I'd headed off, but they knew enough to be uncomfortable, especially when Tessa began restructuring the client portfolios. 2 weeks after her promotion, I was told I'd no longer be leading the Miller Tech account, my biggest client, the one I'd nurtured for 8 years. The handoff email was cold. Just, Carla, we're reallocating this to support new strategic directions. Tessa will take it from here. No meeting, no thanks, no explanation. The same thing happened with 2 other accounts within the month. One by one, the pillars of my career were handed off like houseplants to a neighbor. No one asked if I was okay with it, because they knew I wasn't, but I swallowed it all. I was too proud to beg and too tired to fight battles I had no weapons for. Until the meeting. It was a rainy Monday morning. I remember that clearly. My umbrella had flipped inside out in the wind, and I walked into the office soaked at the hem. My email dinged with a calendar invite. Meeting with HR and Richard, 10:30 a.m., mandatory. My stomach sank. They didn't waste time. Carla, Richard began, not even pretending to be casual. We've had to make some tough decisions due to budget realignments. I said nothing. We're restructuring several departments. Unfortunately, your role is being phased out. Effective immediately. Just like that. No warning, no exit ramp. 17 years evaporated into a single sentence. HR slid an envelope across the table. I didn't open it. I looked at Richard, straight in the eye, and I waited for him to flinch, to say something. But he didn't. He just looked relieved. I stood up. Understood, I said. I'll collect my things. HR stammered something about needing to escort me, but I waved her off. I knew the rules. I'd written half of them. As I walked back to my desk, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt weightless, like my body had finally caught up with what my mind had known for months. They never intended to keep me. The moment Tessa walked through those doors, my fate was sealed. They used me, used my systems, my relationships, my credibility, and when they were done, they tossed me aside. For his daughter, for legacy. I packed slowly. My framed photo of my son, Daniel, from his college graduation. A mug one of my clients sent me with a joke we shared. My planner, worn and scrawled with years of meetings, deadlines, and 1,000 little victories no one but me would ever remember. As I zipped my bag, a junior associate, Maya, rushed over. She looked pale. Carla, I just heard. I'm so sorry. I smiled at her. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm okay. But inside, a fire had started. Not rage, not bitterness, just something sharp, controlled. I wasn't going to fight to stay in a place that had never truly seen me, but I wasn't going to disappear either. Because the one thing I had that Tessa didn't, the clients weren't loyal to the company. They were loyal to me, and I had 17 years of proof. The silence was the hardest part. After the shock wore off, after the HR exit packet and the wide-eyed stares of coworkers faded into the background, I went home to silence. Not dramatic, movie-style grief, just the kind that seeps into your walls. The kind that greets you when your phone doesn't ring and your inbox stays empty. For the first time in 17 years, I had no meetings, no voicemails to return, no reason to dress before noon. The house was still. Too still. I kept telling myself I was fine. You needed a break anyway. I'd mutter into my coffee, trying to find peace in the stillness. But peace never came. Just that gnawing feeling that I'd been erased. Daniel, my son, called one evening from Seattle. "Mom, how's it feel to finally be free from that place?" he asked, trying to sound upbeat. I lied. Honestly, kind of amazing. But I couldn't tell him that every time I opened LinkedIn and saw a post from Oak Ridge, one of my old clients praising Tessa, something in me twisted. I couldn't tell him I slept with my resume open on my laptop, cursor blinking over nothing. That I reread my old performance reviews to remind myself I was once respected. You don't realize how much of your identity is tied to your work until it's taken. Until the people who once needed you stop needing you. Weeks passed. I applied for a few roles, mostly out of habit. Heard nothing back. Too experienced, too expensive, too senior level for companies chasing youth and buzzwords. I was suddenly obsolete. One morning, I got an email from a client I hadn't heard from in a while, Miller Tech. The subject line was simple. "Hey, Carla." I opened it, heart fluttering in a way I wasn't proud of. "Hi, Carla. Just wanted to check in. We were surprised to hear you left Oak Ridge. The transition's been bumpy, to say the least. Any chance we could grab coffee sometime? I'd love to pick your brain on a few things." Jonah was their COO. I'd known him since he was a senior analyst, back when Miller Tech was still scrambling for Series B funding. I'd helped them through their first acquisition, showed up on Saturdays to walk through reorg plans when they couldn't afford a full-time team. That account had meant something to me. I stared at the email for a long time before replying. Would love that. Name a time and place. Carla, we met 2 days later. I wore my old work blazer, though it felt like a costume now. Jonah was warm, but the look in his eyes said everything. "You look good," he said as we sat down. "Better than Oak Ridge does right now." I smiled politely. "I wouldn't know. Haven't been keeping up." He leaned in. "I'll be honest, Carla. The new team, they're not you. We're already seeing delays, mixed messages. It's messy." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. "Truth is," he continued, "we were thinking of bringing in outside help, consultants. But none of them have the history with us you do." My pulse ticked up. "Jonah, are you asking if I'd work with Miller Tech? As an independent?" He hesitated. "Would you?" I took a breath. I hadn't considered consulting. I didn't have a company, no office, no logo, just a name. Mine. But something in me clicked. "I would," I said slowly, "but only on my terms." His grin widened. "That's the Carla I know." We shook hands. No contracts yet, just a promise. And just like that, I had a client. Not a job, not a paycheck, a client. It was a spark. Small, but real. The first flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. That night, I pulled out an old notebook. The same one I used to sketch strategy maps during late-night brainstorms. At the top of a blank page, I wrote, "What if I didn't go back? What if I built something of my own?" Because suddenly, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what they tried to erase. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a knot in my stomach, but from something else. A kind of quiet electricity I hadn't felt in years. The feeling of standing at the edge of something unknown, not because you were pushed, but because you chose to jump. I had no office, no business cards, no website, just a laptop that was 5 years old and a dining room table that became my war room. But I had Jonah. Within a week, we put together a small contract. Modest hours, minimal retainer, just enough to get them through a messy transition. I spent the first few calls easing his team's anxiety, reorganizing the project flow, and clarifying deliverables that had become muddled under Tessa's new team. By the second week, Jonah sent an email that made my hands shake. "Carla, This is the clearest our roadmap has looked in months. You have no idea how much we miss this level of detail. I want to extend the contract. Let's talk quarterly. I stared at that email like it was a map back to myself. It was happening, not someday, now. I filed the paperwork for an LLC the next morning. It felt surreal typing out the name Jameson & Co., not because I wanted to sound bigger than I was, but because it reminded me that I didn't have to do it all alone forever. One day, there'd be a & Co. One day, I'd give someone else what no one gave me. I worked out of my kitchen for the first month, bouncing between Zoom meetings and spreadsheets, sometimes still in my pajama bottoms under a blazer. I kept things simple. No marketing, no networking blitz. Just relationships, real ones. I reached out to former clients, former colleagues, and said one thing. If you ever need support, I'm here. No pressure, no pitch. Just here. Some ignored me. Some replied kindly but cautiously. But a few remembered. They remembered late-night calls, crisis turnarounds, that I never once left them hanging. And then came the second yes, and the third. Soon, I was working 12-hour days again, only this time for myself. It wasn't glamorous. My printer jammed every other day. I burned through highlighters like they were oxygen. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to give me permission. This was mine. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge started slipping. I saw it in LinkedIn updates. A senior consultant I trained posted about exploring new opportunities, a quiet signal. And then another client, one of mine, called to ask if I could revisit a proposal that Tessa never followed up on. The universe has a sense of humor. I was careful, ethical. No poaching, no undercutting. I didn't need to. I simply answered the phone. Still, there were whispers. A message from a former coworker. Tessa's been asking around. They're nervous. You've got people talking. I said nothing. Because here's what no one tells you about quiet revenge. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't need a microphone. It's the way silence becomes absence. The way they notice the hole you left. And the way you no longer care to fill it. One night, as I closed my laptop and stared out the kitchen window, I thought about Richard. About how easily he'd dismiss me. As if I were furniture, outdated, disposable. And I realized something. He never saw me as a threat. He thought I'd go quietly. And for a while, I almost did. But now I was building something they couldn't control. And soon, they'd realize the only thing worse than underestimating someone is giving them a reason to rise. By the end of the third month, the ripple had turned into a current. It started subtly. Calls from old contacts, just checking in. Then confessions that projects at Oak Ridge were unraveling under Tessa's direction. She'd shuffled client teams, implemented aggressive automation without understanding the nuance of relationship-based consulting. And worst of all, she didn't listen. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. The industry was small. Reputation traveled quietly but swiftly, like wind under a door. One client told me, Tessa talks like she read it in a book. You talked like you'd lived it. Another said, we didn't leave Oak Ridge because of you. We came to you because of you. I added their names to my growing list. I still didn't advertise. No social media push, no flashy logos, just word of mouth, authentic referrals, quiet excellence. I wasn't trying to build an empire, just something honest. And in doing so, I realized that's exactly what people were craving. The work grew faster than I expected. I brought on an assistant, Talia, a bright young woman I'd mentored years ago who had since been squeezed out of a company that didn't appreciate her voice. She showed up with fire in her eyes and a notebook full of ideas. I handed her the reins to our operations calendar and never looked back. We met in cafes, sometimes at my house, sometimes on park benches with iced coffee and legal pads. No overhead, no pressure, just progress. And behind the scenes, Oak Ridge was bleeding. I heard about internal chaos through the grapevine. Tessa had lost 2 key accounts. Another client had terminated a contract mid-year, a rarity in our business. And quietly, with no press release, Richard announced a strategic restructuring. Translation: the ship was leaking, and they were patching holes with duct tape. One day, I received a message on LinkedIn from a name I hadn't seen in years. Clarence, the VP of Operations at Hamilton Reed, one of our biggest old accounts. Hey Carla, long time. Hope you're doing well. I've been hearing some great things about Jameson and Co. Would love to reconnect. My throat tightened as I read it. Hamilton Reed was the client Richard had always bragged about at conferences. The anchor client. The one he sent me to clean up after every quarterly disaster. Though he always took the credit. I took a breath and replied, "Always a pleasure, Clarence. Let me know when you're free to chat." We had coffee that Thursday. He was candid, almost apologetic. "Tessa's not cutting it," he said. "She's smart, no question, but she doesn't know how to lead. And honestly, we miss your touch." My voice was steady. "I'm open to the conversation, but I don't work on anyone's terms but mine now." He smiled. "That's exactly what we're looking for." By the following Monday, Jameson and Co. had signed its largest contract to date, a 6-month engagement with Hamilton Reed. High stakes, high visibility. That same day, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Richard. The name lit up my phone like a ghost from another life. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. "Carla," he said, his voice falsely warm. "It's been a while." "It has," I replied flat. "I'm sure you've heard we've had a few transitions lately." "I've heard things." "I wanted to touch base. Some of our clients have moved on, and a few mentioned your name. Just wanted to see what's going on. If there's anything we should be aware of." I almost laughed. Anything we should be aware of? As if I owed him transparency. As if I still worked for him. I leaned back in my chair, smiled to myself. "Richard," I said calmly, "I only work with people who value what I bring. That's all you need to be aware of." Silence. Then a short, clipped, "Right. Well, best of luck." "You too." I ended the call. No anger, no drama, just closure. Because by then, I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was building something. And they couldn't stop it. The woman they dismissed? The one they pushed aside like a dusty old file? She was now the competition. And she was just getting started. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day that used to blur into all the others when I worked at Oak Ridge. Meetings, checklists, catered lunches no one ate. But now, every day had shape. I was reviewing a proposal draft when Talia poked her head into my home office, eyes wide. "You have a voicemail," she said. "You're going to want to hear it." I raised an eyebrow. "Who is it?" She hesitated, then smirked slightly. "Richard West." I blinked. She held out the phone. I pressed play. "Hi, Carla. Richard here. I know things have shifted. Look, I'd like to have a conversation if you're open to it. We're reassessing some leadership decisions and client relationships, and your name keeps coming up. I think we may have an opportunity to work together again. Call me." He even had the nerve to sound cheerful, like we were old friends catching up over coffee. Not a man who fired me without warning so his daughter could play CEO. I stared out the window, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee cup. He was unraveling, and I knew it. That afternoon, I received 3 more messages. One from a senior project manager still at Oak Ridge, one I'd mentored years ago, another from a former client now shopping for a new firm, and one from an anonymous tip through my company's contact form. Word is, Tessa's on her way out, major clients jumping ship, HR's in panic mode. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was a storm. And Richard was clinging to whatever lifelines he could find. At 5 p.m., just as I was shutting down for the day, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Carla," he said. "I appreciate you picking up. I figured I'd give you 5 minutes," I replied. "After all, I gave you 17 years. He chuckled nervously. "Right. Look, I won't waste your time. Things have been difficult. Transitions are always unpredictable, and I think it's clear we made some missteps. Missteps, I repeated coolly. He paused. Tessa's stepping down. Voluntarily. It's just not the right fit. And several of your former clients have reached out expressing strong preferences for your approach. We'd like to explore the possibility of rehiring you, or alternatively, partnering on some accounts. Partnering. Now I laughed. Richard, I said slowly, when you fired me, you handed me the greatest clarity of my life. You showed me exactly what you thought I was worth. And I believed you, until your clients reminded me I was worth far more. I understand that, he said quickly. But this isn't personal, it's business. No, I said. It was always personal. You just never noticed that loyalty, integrity, and trust actually matter in this business. Silence. Then he tried again. We're open to terms, Carla. Compensation, autonomy, even a consulting arrangement. You'd have more control than before. It was almost sad. Not quite desperation, but the beginning stages of it. Richard, I said gently but firmly, you don't have anything I want. He was quiet. I'm not interested in cleaning up your mess. I'm building something clean of my own. Another silence. This one deeper. I see, he finally said. Good, I replied, and hung up. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of that conversation sink in. Not out of guilt, but from something deeper. I had no desire to punish him. I didn't need to. He'd built his entire career believing that power came from titles and corner offices and whose name was on the firm. And now he was watching everything unravel because he forgot the one thing that holds power in place. People. And people remember how you treat them. That night, I opened a bottle of wine. Talia joined me. We sat on my patio, reviewing our pipeline. 4 new clients in the last 2 months. A strategic partnership offer. A speaking invitation for an industry panel. Me, the woman once considered too old school for leadership. Talia raised her glass. To the woman they tried to replace, she said. I smiled. They couldn't, I replied. 6 months after Richard fired me, I walked past Oak Ridge Solutions without looking up. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I didn't need to see it to know what had happened inside. The firm had shrunk. I knew that much. The whispers had become public knowledge. Clients lost, staff turnover, investor concerns. Tessa had resigned, though anyone with a pulse knew what that really meant. Richard had stepped back into day-to-day operations, but the magic he'd once commanded had faded. You can only sell the illusion of competence for so long before the lights turn on. And when they did, they found a mess. Meanwhile, Jameson & Co. had outgrown my kitchen table. We just signed a lease on a cozy, sunlit office space in Evanston. Nothing flashy. Exposed brick, 2 glass-walled meeting rooms, and a pot of lavender by the window that Talia insisted on naming Hope. It felt like a place where real work could happen, where no one would ever be invisible again. We weren't a firm yet, not in the traditional sense, but we were becoming something real. We had 5 clients on long-term contracts, 2 part-time team members, and a waiting list. And more importantly, I had peace. Not the kind that comes from a spa day or a weekend off. The kind that lives in your chest when you know that no one holds power over you anymore. That the floor won't drop out from under you just because someone else decides you're inconvenient. I'd rebuilt my life on my terms. And nothing was borrowed. Not my name, not my clients, not my credibility. One morning, I received a letter in the mail, thick envelope, expensive paper, the kind Oak Ridge used for formal correspondence. It was from Richard, a printed note, hand-signed. Carla, I wanted to acknowledge everything you've built. There's a certain poetic justice to it all, I suppose. We underestimated you. I underestimated you. That was my mistake. If you're ever open to a conversation, I'd welcome it. Richard. I read it once, then again. And then I folded it up, placed it in a file labeled Closed Chapters, and slid it into the drawer. Not out of malice, but because I didn't need anything from him. Not his apology, not his validation, not even his regret. When I looked at where I was, what I'd built, I felt no anger, no longing to be vindicated. I felt certain that the version of me who once waited for permission no longer existed. Certain that every dismissal, every slight, every stolen credit line had only sharpened me, and certain that my success didn't come from proving them wrong. It came from finally believing I was right to begin with. That Friday, as I locked up the office for the weekend, Talia called after me. "Want me to order a plaque for the wall?" she asked. "Something inspiring?" I thought about it for a second, then smiled. "Yeah, just 4 words." She grinned. "Let me guess. Built, not borrowed?" I nodded. "Exactly." She scribbled it down. And as we stepped out into the evening sun, I felt it again. That quiet power they never saw coming. That steady, unstoppable force that doesn't need to announce itself. Because when you build something with your own 2 hands, it speaks for itself.